Hello and welcome to another Lord Slav video where we return to our series of writer overviews where we go through a selection of stories from one of the famous Doctor Who writers and discuss the quality of their stories, what we think of them, as well as what kind of things do we see throughout their writing, what is their kind of style. And today we're going to have a look at David Fisher, who's an often forgotten writer because he kind of wrote in the mid Tom Baker era, which is an area of Doctor Who which often gets forgotten aside from the famous stories like the City of Death, for example. But I think he certainly is a writer that deserves a little more recognition because even if you're not a fan of his stories, you must at the very least admit he's quite unique in the way that he writes and the kind of things that he writes. So, and today to help me look through these stories, I have Brian.
Oh yeah.
Are you still running Briar Heart 02 as a channel?
Um yeah, kind of. Not in its original form. I'm not a Doctor Who channel anymore. I'm trying to switch over to more of a booktube format, although I do still do videos on 8th Doctor adventures books. So,
So if you like books, go and that's not funny. I like books too. I shouldn't be taking the mick out of
yeah.
this. I actually read a lot of books.
You
But
fucking cunt.
but
What the hell?
but if you're a nerd who likes books, go and check out Briarheart 02, like me, because I like books too.
Yeah, just put out a video on Dune Messiah.
I haven't read that
So,
yet. I want to read it because I've read the first one. I liked it.
you should read it. It's good, but
Somebody
not as
put
good as the first one.
Yeah, somebody put me off by talking about some of the subject material. But anyway, we're getting off topic here. We're talking about David Fisher. And his third story comes in one of my favourites, season 16, in The Stones of Blood. What do we think of that one, Brian?
The Stones of Blood. It's a pretty good example of what people seem to think that that the later sort of Tom Baker era is. Like, if you look at a bunch of expanded universe material, a bunch of stuff written in this for like this time period in the Fourth Doctor's life is trying to emulate sort of this Douglas Adamsy, David Fisher style, I think.
Really?
And
I didn't find this one to be particularly Douglas Adams-y. If anything, I thought it was more of a Hinchcliffe, like throwback to the kind of Hinchcliffe era with kind of gothic horror.
well, I'd say that's definitely true for the first half. The second half is a bit more like that sort of
That's true.
it's got
What
that eccentric, goofy sci-fi element about it that I think people remember a lot about this time period in the show.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, the Stones of Blood kind of starts out for the first two and a half parts as being like kind of very typical gothic horror story with like kind of, pagan sacrifices, weird monsters that like
It,
absorb people's blood. It's brilliant, like kind of scary stuff. But then as soon as the kind of twist comes in that the reason why all these things are here is because of like there's a ship in hyperspace above this stone circle, it kind of transforms into this kind of like sci-fi courtroom drama comedy with the Justice
yeah,
Machines, the
it's
Megara.
like it's like the perfect Tom Baker story because it's a kind of this weird, unique combination of what I guess is I'd say is both genres of his time on the show in one story.
That's very true, actually. Yeah, because it does kind of incorporate both elements. It's funny that you call it Douglas Adamsy, though, even though he wasn't script editor yet. But it certainly is showing the kind of direction that Graham Williams wants to take the show, and while also still kind of holding true to where it had been at its kind of, what many people saw as its height in the Hinchcliffe era. And gonna be honest, I prefer the first half. That I just love the kind of
I do
gothic horror
too.
stuff. Yeah.
In fact, I just want to bring this up. I don't think that the genre split stories shouldn't do this genre split thing because I just listened to a Big Finish audio that does that. Like it directly was inspired by the Stones of Blood genre splitting in the middle. I think it was like House of Blue Fire or something, and it like completely ruins the the atmosphere of the story for me. It starts off as like this haunted house story and then becomes a weird military camp story. I don't know. It was just like,
So why do you think
don't do this.
why do you think it
Uh,
works here then?
I'm not sure. Maybe it's just because David Fisher got lucky in that he just found two genres that work, or maybe he just got lucky and wrote it well by accident. I'm not sure, but I've it it's it can be tone deaf. I think like tonal whiplash can happen,
Yeah.
um, and tonal whiplash isn't a good thing. I don't know why it doesn't happen here. For some reason here it just works, but in other places it does not. Don't do this.
I feel that it's actually pretty well integrated at the story, which is probably why it works here. Because like it starts off with the whole kind of like build up of like this kind of timeless family ownership of this land, like a kind of pagan cult that goes back 4,000 years, that kind of thing, kind of building up this kind of awe-inspiring length of time where this one person who's revealed to be one of the characters, what's her face? Forgotten the character's name. I mean, but it turns out that one of like the female characters who's kind of working with the archaeologist is in fact Cessia of Diplos, this kind of alien creature who's been running this pagan cult for 4,000 years to help maintain their power, and that's why it's always been women in charge of this bit of land. And then that kind of leads into, well, why is she here? Because she managed to escape from her prison ship where she was due to be like tried and executed. And I thought that's kind of how it leads in one to the other very well, because it's kind of very connected.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess if you're gonna do something like this, you need to make sure you've got the right connective tissue.
And I feel what really makes it work with the kind of this kind of genre splitting is just how good the kind of twist is with because kind of that woman is just kind of seems like a side character, and although a couple of things do seem a bit off. And then it works really well when you find out that she's kind of leader of the pagan cult, because there'd been like all the clues leading up to that. So, for example, like the missing paintings in the big manor house.
Well, I think that's obviously these are my thoughts on Stones of Blood, not House of Blue Fire, but like I think what makes it work here in comparison to something like House of Blue Fire is the build up towards the genre split. Yeah, you're right. There's a mystery here, and the genre split just happens as a result of getting the answers.
Exactly. And that's kind of one thing that I've noticed that is a theme in David Fisher's writing. He's very good at kind of having those mysteries and those twists pretty consistently in his stories. And that's something that really works here, and also really works in the Leisure Hive, which obviously we'll get onto later. And yeah, I personally think that it works in this story, and as much as I do prefer the first half of all the kind of gothic horror, the kind of augury that like feast on human blood, like it's great gothic horror stuff. The kind of like courtroom stuff with Cessia of Diplos, who has been really well built up as a villain at this point due to like how they started off as a side character and there's the twist that they're this alien. They're quite a love to hate character, probably one of the best villainesses of classic Who, and it's just thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree.
I thought that like Mary Tam as Romana gets quite a lot of good to do in this story as well.
Mary Tam as Romana is always a joy to watch. Like I don't think I've watched or heard a performance from her that has been bad. She's great.
Yeah, she will be sorely missed. She's probably a controversial opinion, but she's my favourite Romana.
I I like both so much that I can't really decide between the two.
Mm.
Although I will say, um, Mary Tam's Romana probably has more stories on TV that I like.
Well, that's true because season 16 is just like mwah, lovely, lovely stuff. And speaking of which, let's move on to the next David Fisher story, which is the Androids of Tara, and probably my favourite of his four stories, as I am a big fan of the Androids of
Interestingly
Tara.
enough, Androids of Tara and Stones of Blood are a double feature for
Yeah,
David Fisher.
it's very rare that a guest writer, especially one that doesn't really get that many more slots on the show, has back-to-back stories.
Yeah, it's strange.
I'm struggling to think of another time that that's happened. I don't think it has.
The only time I think. Wait a minute, didn't Chris. I don't know how his last name
No,
is pronounced. I
what,
don't know if
Bibbies?
it's Boucher or like
Oh,
Boucher or something.
oh yeah, no, he did because he had the face of evil, then the robots of death. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the only other time it happens. Yeah, I think it's just. I mean, I've always said Boucher. I mean, if you've ever seen him talk, he doesn't sound like a Boucher, but maybe that's just me being mean.
no, no, he doesn't.
But
But you
he is a
never
great
know.
writer. In fact, he's one I'll have to do a video on at some point, and he's very good when he writes for Blake Seven. For those who've seen that, but yeah, Androids of Tara. This is such a radical departure from the Stones of Blood as well. So I think very much what we see throughout his stories is that he tries his hands at quite a lot of different kind of tones in Doctor Who. Like he doesn't stick to one. Like he tries to do as many different kinds of things as possible, and from the kind of um, pagan gothic horror to the kind of courtroom drama slash like slightly comedic kind of tone of the end of the Sons of Blood, we go to a swashbuckling adventure in a kind of semi-feudal kingdom where it's like courtroom politics, fighting over the throne, and it's just so much fun. Tom
I'd
Baker
say
thrives in this environment.
I'd say again though that it sort of has that late Fourth Doctor era charm about it. You
Yeah,
know, the sort of like tongue in cheek
yeah, it's like it has such a high
lines.
level of confidence in itself.
Yeah,
And that's something to be in mind, especially I think you need to have a lot of confidence in yourself to pull off a story like this. Because when you're doing like a kind of, ooh, this is kind of medieval feudal, but it's also got like kind of futuristic stuff in like, robots, you've got to have a lot of confidence to kind of pull it off because there's a lot of suspension of disbelief to get through there. And I do find it kind of
yeah,
interesting to think about a planet where they kind of continue to stagnate with kind of, feudal power and and technology is still developed but only by kind of the lower classes.
yeah. It is. It's actually really, really dark concept if you think about it.
Yeah,
But
but they don't get too much of the dark side of it. It's more just like, nothing.
that it's just the backdrop to
What?
the story. Yeah,
Well, to quote Jodie Whittaker, the system isn't the problem, it's the people that use it, and that's why Count Grendel can't be king.
yeah,
But yeah, but you're not meant to take, like, the kind of, like, feudal bit too seriously. Like, you're not supposed to. I don't think that's something that is necessarily to think about too hard, as that's not really the focus of the story. The focus on the story is more or less just kind of playing out this kind of dramatics, courtroom drama, etc., which is just always fun to watch. I love when the Doctor is kind of in and around the trappings of power, like he's kind of an advisor to the powerful. I always find that quite a fascinating concept and the way he does that. It's always great fun, especially with Tom Baker. He just comes in with his big Billy Big Balls, and I think that he gets treated as a noble because of it.
yeah. No, it's good. It's good. I definitely enjoy it. Actually, one thing I wanted to note was like all the performances in Androids of Tara are like superb.
They are. I mean,
Like,
who plays Count Grendel? I've forgotten his name, but
oh,
he's
I don't remember either, but like he's fucking fantastic.
he is twirling his mustache just constantly throughout. But that's exactly what was needed from the role, as he's just a dastardly piece of shit, but with the kind of
Is
like
he,
regal demeanor.
yeah, he's like Dick Dastardly.
Just I mean, he's what really keeps the episode going throughout because you just want to see what he's going to get up to next.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, Androids of Tara is like really fun.
And that I
Uh,
think that's what makes the sword fight at the end between him and Tom Baker so satisfying to watch
yeah,
because he's finally bested at something that he considers himself to be superior at.
yeah. Great, great stuff.
Yeah, they're a great story, the androids of Tara, and we'll always have great fun with that. And now to move on to his third story in season 17 now, The Creature from the Pit. Quite a
Hmm.
different story from his previous two. I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts on it, given your snort when I mentioned the title.
Uh, well, I don't think it's great. Um,
What don't you like about it?
I don't know. It's really boring. I find it's like painfully boring. I think Lala Ward is like atrocious in it. Tom Baker's pretty good in it, I will say. Um, the creature in the pit itself. I mean, the jokes have all already been made. Um,
Yeah, definitely have that image on the screen right now.
it,
Picture me.
it's very runaroundy as well, like, and not in a good way.
I kind of get what you mean because I
I,
actually
f-
quite like this story, but my kind of criticism is it's a really good story that's been written in a really ponderous way. So like, I love the kind of idea. It's like a planet, it's stagnating, which again that's kind of a theme we're going to see throughout David Fisher's writing, the kind of like kind of ideas of stagnation. Because somebody like the lady, oh fuck, forgot the name. The kind of big villain. She has like a monopoly over metal, and so is kind of preventing like the importation of metal, so that she can keep her monopoly and keep her power. And then it's about like working out that this kind of creature that they're thrown down the pit's actually an ambassador that's going to do the trade deal, that can actually enrich the planet, but she's just desperate to cling to power. I don't know. I like that kind of um, alien power dynamics, which actually
I
that
mean,
again that's a theme throughout his stories. Alien power dynamics. It's great fun.
the issue is it's all strong concepts. Don't get me wrong, strong concepts. But like, I don't know. I just feel like this story has sort of whatever the opposite of 45-minute syndrome is. It's way too drawn out, I think. I feel like the same conversation happens at least 4 times in one of the episodes. I can't remember which
Oh,
one,
it's Lady
but
Adrasta. That was her name, Lady Adrasta. She's the main villain.
I don't like her.
Really, I do. I thought she was a great villain. In fact, I think that's another thing that's kind of David Fisher does really well. That not a lot of classic writers do well. Is like a great female villain.
Yeah, I don't know. This one just kind of falls flat for me.
Yeah, see, I quite like it. Like the way that she's like eager to manipulate and use people. She's kind of one of those very much love to hate kind of characters. And then when you kind of learn just what she does for the sake of her own power, like holding back this entire civilization, it's very satisfying to see her crushed to death by the big bollock at the end.
Isn't there also like a group of men
Yeah, they're
living
kind
in
of
the woods or some shit?
well, yeah. Basically, they're like they're kind of there to demonstrate the the scarcity of metal because the fact that they're these raiders, they'll just take anything metal because there's so little of it on the planet. It's all really worth a lot.
Right. And like Lala Ward has this entire like B plot with them and K9 that is really awful to watch because she clearly does not like this script.
Yeah, I mean to be fair, that kind of B plot doesn't really go. anywhere from what I can remember, which is a shame.
No, it doesn't.
But
It's
what I
kind
will
of just
say
there.
is talking about kind of David Fisher's kind of good aptitude for like twists. I really love the kind of twist that like the big bollock kind of monster. It's not just like this creature that they throw things down to kill. It's actually like a kind of ambassador which had came here to help them, and that's kind of all built up through like the evidence you've seen so far. Like with looking at the egg at the beginning and things like that. It's great.
Yeah, no, I enjoy concepts of this story. This story is like should be great, but like I just don't like the actual execution of it.
Yeah, well, I think as you say, even though I, on the whole, do like it myself, I think the concepts carry it through. It does have a serious issue of just not really knowing how to sequence
It's
the
not
events to
paced
tell the
well.
story. It doesn't know how to sequence the events to tell the story.
This
And you
is
see,
this is
I'd
this is
actually
like
I'd actually disagree about the opposite of 45 minute syndrome because the ending is actually incredibly rushed in this story. I feel it just needed to have
that's true.
a more rational and logical and kind of thinking, well, what's going to kind of keep the audience interested throughout kind of way of setting out the story. This is a really difficult, like, this is probably one of the hardest things to criticize about TV when there's a story that all of the elements are there, but it doesn't quite work because it always is just impossible to discover, well, how could we reorganize the story? You can't do it in, like, a quick, like, kind of discussion. It would take, like, a whole plot restructuring, but it definitely needed another draft, not because there's anything wrong with the dialogue. In fact, I think the dialogue's actually pretty good. It's just the way that the story's events are sequenced. It could do with some work, and then it could be a classic, really. And I do like it still, but that definitely is a criticism that does resonate with me.
I just got to put it down to like really poor pacing, honestly, in my opinion. I think Creature from the Pit has a huge issue with pacing, and that's kind of what ruins it for me. And also, Lala Ward's performance is
Yeah, she's trying
really
to
fucking laughable.
she's trying to ape Mary Tam, and it doesn't really come off.
Yeah, it's weird.
Which seems such a strange thing. You'd think if she was going to do that, she'd do it in like a first episode. But yeah,
Yeah.
she's like quite far in and has established herself as her own Romana. Then all of a
Well,
sudden decides to change her
maybe
performance.
I mean, was the production order this one first? Maybe.
Maybe. Well, I'll tell you what it could be. I mean, obviously David Fisher's already wrote two stories for Romana, so he's probably used to the Mary Tam Romana. So probably
Yeah,
wrote
so
Romana 2 much the
he
same
might
way.
even just be writing Mary Tam.
That is entirely possible, given the fact that he's wrote for Romana twice and also wrote her really well in those previous two stories. So that's probably where he maybe got confused.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still think it's a good story on the whole, despite its issues. And it definitely has. It definitely has. It is sad because it has a lot of potential to be more than it is.
Yeah. Like I said, concepts great, execution really bad. Like to the point where I find it unwatchable. I can't watch it.
And I think these exact criticisms are what we could apply to the Leisure Hive, which we're going to move on to now, which is his
Oh,
fourth and final
see,
story.
you and I have sort of reversed positions on the Leisure Hive. I really like the Leisure Hive.
I used to hate it. Now I don't think it's bad, not at all. But I have exactly the same criticisms of it that I have of the Creature from the Pit,
I
except
mean,
probably a bit more harsh.
yeah.
I mean, in the like, I don't know. It takes so long for
I will
the kind
say
of
the
plot to move
ending.
anywhere. Like, basically, they spend so long just introducing concept after concept after concept, and it's like, it's not that you can't have this many concepts in a story that's 4 parts long. It's just that you need to introduce them like spaciously. Like, you can't just have 50 minutes of introducing concepts. You've got to move one of the concepts somewhere to kind of justify it being in the script to keep the audience's attention first. And then
Well,
after that, you can move on to introducing a new one.
yeah, I'd say this story's main issue is it feels like it's rushing. It's like
Absolutely.
so if you sit down and watch it, right, you need to pay attention to the story to understand it because there are lines in here which are really important, but they're like blink and you'll miss it, and if you miss it, the entire story is just fucking nonsense.
Well, to kind of explain it to people listening, so here's all the stuff that's kind of introduced in the first two episodes. So there's a leisure hive on a planet which has been destroyed by nuclear war in a war between these aliens, the Famasi, and the Argolans. And the Argolans are all dying slowly off and they can't reproduce anymore. So this is the end. And so they're leaving the leisure hive as like a monument to themselves and to try and advocate for peace in future times as they've now become pacifists because of how bad war's been. And there's this machine which involves this new science called tachyonics, except for the Argolans haven't done anything with tachyonics thus far. And the tachyonics can kind of manipulate, where particles are, and like you can separate things, put them back together. You can even potentially reverse and forwards time, but they haven't quite worked that out. And there's actually an Earth scientist who thinks he's worked it out, but actually it's a con to get more funds. But then also the Famasi want to buy out the planet partially because they feel guilty about the war, and also partially because they wanted the planet anyway. That's why they went to war in the first place. But it turns out these people aren't actually Famasi, or at least they're not the Famasi government. These are actually a criminal element of the Famasi who have infiltrated to try and con them into selling it out, while being disguised as humans, and then arrested by the Famasi government. But it turns out that the tachyonic machine is actually being used by one of the Argolans secretly to help reproduce a massive army to take the Argolans back onto war and revenge on the Famasi. And it's like, this is too much for a 4-parter.
I think if it was 6 parts long, it would be much better.
Absolutely, especially like, well, and it's the thing. It's also kind of really badly paced because the first 3 parts barely anything happens, and then in part 4 it's just like just speeds through it at light speed, like the whole kind of.
I don't know. Let's be fair. You get through the first few those concepts. You get through the first few of those concepts in the first 3 episodes. And then a fuck ton of them are just dumped on in the last one.
Yeah.
It's
just too much to like bring to a satisfying conclusion of one episode.
Doesn't the tachyon stuff like that? That's what makes Tom Baker get all old and shit, right?
Yeah.
So
because
he fucks up somewhere.
Well, it's because the scientist who'd faked the experiments is kind of in deep shit, so Romana helps him kind of fix it and actually make it work. But it actually doesn't work still, so instead it just turns Tom Baker old.
Yeah. I don't know. I like Leisure Hive. I feel like it feels very high budget for 80s Doctor Who, actually.
It is a beautiful story, the way it looks, the way it's directed is outstanding. And fun fact, the director who worked on this never worked on Doctor Who again because he went way over budget.
Oh, well,
it was described as not over budget, but as severely over budget.
Well, see, there you go. This story looks like, I don't know. It's sort of
much like the Leisure Hive itself. It's a monument to his dead career.
Yeah. But it looks like, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's how good it looks.
You're just saying that because Paddy Kingsland does the score.
Does Paddy King do the score for Hitchhiker's Guide?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Come on, it's
absolutely. Now that you mention it, yeah, the music's quite similar too.
But yeah, no, well, I will say that I do love a lot of the concepts. I love the idea of like there's this planet that's dying, nearly dead, and they're kind of leaving this as kind of a monument to themselves and peace and all that. I love the idea of like kind of this kind of rebel faction of this alien race trying to buy out the planet they were previously at war with to kind of I love the kind of idea of tachyonics and all that. It just they can't get it to come together in a fully satisfying way.
Well, also tachyonics is just kind of stupid. as well. I remember thinking that while watching it. I was just like, this is dumb,
No, I mean,
and there's
like
no way this would actually work.
there is more dumb science. There is dumber science than this in Doctor Who. Like, I mean, there's enough there's enough of a wall of technobabble to suspend my disbelief. I don't mind it.
I maybe
I
I
mean,
don't know.
it's not as bad as
I
something
just
like
remember as much as I was enjoying it the second time I watched it, I was like, this tachyonics thing is still just really fucking stupid.
I see. I don't think it's. I think it's enough to suspend your disbelief. It's not as bad as something like isometric testing from the Keys of Marinus, where they can like find out the character and personality of the person who last held an object instead of
Yeah,
fingerprints. That's like the dumbest science of Doctor Who.
That's pretty awful too.
And then Barbara says it's much better than fingerprints. It's like, how? You can't actually tell anything from this.
But yeah, I think before Connor watched Leisure Hive, I used to tell him that, oh yeah, the first three parts are pretty good. The fourth one is where it loses it a bit.
But see,
Um,
I'm not sure about that because the first three parts. I mean, I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy them because I did enjoy them, but it is just so much squandered potential the way that it's put together because it is just like introducing concept after concept after concept, and barely any of them are getting any payoff at
well,
any time.
because here was what I was thinking while I was watching it. I was like, wow, I can't believe I didn't like this the first time through because these first three parts are pretty good. And then I got to part four and realized the meat of the story was in part four, all in part four. And I said, oh,
And I think
this is probably why I didn't like it.
and you're absolutely right in terms of the making it a six-parter. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a six-part supremacist. I think it really would benefit the story just to have that extra time.
Yeah, just like two extra episodes for this story, I think would work really well. Like all that stuff that is just fucking dumped in episode four would have enough time to breathe.
Yeah, I mean, you could have more of a build-up for like, what's his name? Pengel's plan. I think that's his name. More kind of a solid build-up for that. You can kind of, show us a bit more of the Leisure Hive. I mean, think about it, we barely see what goes on in the Leisure Hive. I'd like to learn more about, how they're kind of leaving this as a monument to themselves and like, how they're making it a symbol for peace and all that. I'd love to know more about that. That could have added some real meat to the world building even more. And certainly, I mean, honestly, I'd almost think about cutting the kind of Famasi plot because it pretty much has nothing to do with the rest of the story.
God, I will say, did somebody say Famasi is one of the worst lines ever?
Although what I will say is that twist where it turns out that he's a Famasi the whole time, it is good, but again, I just think that the whole subplot there is so unnecessary and bogs down the story.
I do like the Famasi though.
Yeah, I mean,
It's the weird thing. I do like them. I just
they look kind of
they
cute.
do feel kind of like non-essential though. You're right.
And I think in terms of what you were talking about in terms of genre twisting, I feel that this kind of does that a little bit again, where it's kind of very kind of dark kind of theme with this kind of post-apocalyptic
That's
planet where the whole
probably
race is
another
dying.
reason.
And yet
Another
there's still quite a lot of Graham Williams-esque humour, despite the fact that this is now the JNT era.
Well, that's probably another reason part four doesn't quite work for me is because it kind of goes full hog on that sort of feel, while the rest of the story hasn't really felt like that up until this point. Like the last, I want to say, like 5-10 minutes of this of Leisure Hive are just like batshit crazy with like the humor and stuff, and I guess humor, um, and it's just I don't think it fits. I think part four as a whole is just like it's what lets the story down.
I completely agree. Well, I think it's time to wrap up this video now, and I think what we've kind of agreed upon is kind of David Fisher as a writer, very strong, sometimes can get a bit mixed, sometimes struggles to put the plots together despite coming up with some of the best concepts. Likes a twist, his twists are very good, and can sometimes make a kind of genre change work, sometimes he can't.
Yeah, yeah. I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel maybe the best, like if he was to write another episode, the advice that I would give to him is keep it simple, because although like the concepts are just amazing in the Leisure Hive and the Creature from the Pit, they don't work as well as his first two episodes, which keep it more simple. I mean, even the Stones of Blood does have a few kind of complicated stuff in, but it keeps it fairly contained and cohesive mostly, and it is fairly straightforward. Like there's not too much there, and because when he just has a simple amount of work with, it works really well. When he tries to include too much, sometimes it can fray at the edges quite a lot.
Yeah.
Well,
Like his first two stories are pretty strong, and then those second two have have some issues where it just seems like they needed another draft or they needed to be tightened together a bit more. I'm not sure what. I do know that around season 17 and season 18, um, production was hell.
but yeah, because of hyperinflation and all that.
So that might have something to do with it. Maybe like deadlines weren't as lenient as they were at one point. I'm not sure. But like, no, I do think David Fisher is a good writer.
Definitely, I would
It's
have loved to
just,
see what he could have done with a six-parter. To be honest,
yeah, yeah. I think he really would have benefited from
because he's excellent at
six
world
parts.
building. He's excellent at world building, and he can come up with just loads of concepts which are really cool. And some, I think, if he had a bit more time to flesh, I almost feel that Creature from the Pit and Leisure Hive, maybe if they were just a part or two longer, maybe he would have been able to like pace it better just because he had more space to flesh out all of these ideas.
Yeah, I it's a shame they got rid of the six parter.
Well, they still had it at this point. They just gave it to the fucking Armageddon factor in season 16, and then Sharda never got made.
Yeah,
Oh well,
that's true.
thank you very much for coming on, Brian.
No problem.
And
I
as
enjoyed
said,
myself.
book nerds, get over to Brian Hart O2's channel, and thank you very much for watching this Lord Star video. I'll see you back next time in another one.